it's good to see everybody on this evening. We're glad to have everybody here, and we're glad you're here to join us for the Mountain Zoom. This evening we have Dr. Ellen Crocker with the University of Kentucky Department of Forestry, and she is here to give us some news about the Hemlock woolly adelgid. Hemlock woolly adelgid was first found in Kentucky in 2004, but it was actually found in Virginia prior to that. I think one of the locations that was closer to the Wise County area, it was found over around John Flanagan Lake. I'm thinking around 2002, 2003. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Crocker. So go ahead and share your screen or your PowerPoint presentation video, however you want to get started, Ellen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for having me. Nice to be here talking with you all about Hemlock woolly adelgid. So my name is Ellen Crocker, and I'm in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky. And I cover forest health, which is a broad area that's invasive insects and diseases and plants and management and a lot of different things. So today we're going to be talking about Hemlock woolly adelgid, which is an invasive insect that has been here, as Jeremy mentioned, for quite some time. And we can talk a little bit about the insect itself, the Hemlock woolly adelgid, or I might refer to it as HWA, kind of its current status, as well as some background on what it is and where it came from. And then talk a little bit about some management options for the Hemlock woolly adelgid, both kind of in the short term as well as future directions. What are people looking for long term when it comes to keeping hemlock in our forests? Lots of people to thank for assisting me with this talk that have a lot of expertise in Hemlock woolly adelgid in particular. I want to mention Elizabeth McCarty at University of Georgia, who provided me with some info that I'll share with you about some kind of current best practices in treatment for Hemlock woolly adelgid. So all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with eastern hemlock. It's a really important species in our forests, maybe not from a timber perspective necessarily, but certainly from the kind of well-being of our forests and our related communities. So hemlock are really dominant trees in a lot of sites, maybe along kind of riparian areas, these creeks and river areas. Especially important there. And they do a lot for those forested areas in terms of water quality, in terms of the invertebrates and amphibians that live there. And that will impact things downstream as well. So they're really dominant in certain sites, and their loss would obviously have some big implications. Worldwide, we have our eastern hemlock. But there are other hemlock species worldwide. So our eastern hemlock is right here, Siva canadensis. But there's Carolina hemlock, and there are other hemlocks around the world. So this is important to think about. There's western hemlocks, and there's many different hemlock species in Asia. So when we're talking about the Hemlock woolly adelgid, that's an invasive species not native to where we are in the eastern US, but native, our Hemlock woolly adelgid is thought to be native to Japan, the invasive one that we have, but there are also woolly adelgids in the western United States. We did not have them in this area prior to, pretty recently. So their arrival, Jeremy, when were you saying that you'd first detected them in Kentucky? When was the first detection?
I think it was found in 2004.
2004, yeah. And this is something that's really been increasing in the eastern United States throughout the 1900s and kind of spreading through different parts of the eastern United States. And I'll show you a map of where it is right now. But it's thought to have originally been introduced to the Eastern United States maybe in the 1920s, first detected in the 1950s, and then a kind of rapid spread throughout the region in the 80s and kind of where we are now. So even though there are woolly adelgids in the Western United States, we don't have any kind of native woolly adelgids, and they don't have natural predators here. So they've been able to kind of proliferate and cause widespread death of hemlocks. And it depends. That death and the severity of it depends on a number of things. So one of the things that Jeremy and I were talking about is how, when this first was detected, the thought was that this is going to immediately wipe out all of the hemlocks. And it has done exactly that in some areas. You'll get areas like this photo here in the Great Smoky Mountains where the hemlocks have been killed by this insect. But in our area, it's been pretty patchy. And there are little, patches of it, little pockets of it that maybe come and go and not causing quite the same widespread mortality as, let's say, emerald ash borer has. Part of that is due to the pockety nature of hemlocks in the landscape. You don't have a continuous level of hemlock everywhere. It tends to be much more restricted environmentally. But part of that is also due to some of the environmental conditions that we've had. So when we had those polar vortex conditions, those real extreme cold conditions, it did knock the hemlock woolly adelgid populations back. It certainly is not going to be enough to keep them in check long term. Hemlock woolly adelgid is a problem far to our north, where conditions are going to get much colder than they do here typically. But if we have like extreme cold spells that are prolonged, that can impact the insects and knock their populations back, at least for a little bit. And I think we've been benefiting from that for the past few years, likely to see their populations increase in the future, especially if we don't have those kinds of really cold conditions anytime soon. So here's kind of a picture of what you might see. The adelgids themselves are very tiny. They're kind of almost too small to see with just your eye. So you can kind of see these little dots in these white fluffy masses. And that's the adelgids. They're these soft-bodied insects. They feed at the base of these hemlock needles. They suck the sap, the nutrients from that tree, and will cause death of those needles. They'll cause those tips to die over time. And a really heavy infestation could kill a tree in as little as, maybe 4 years, but many times they'll take longer than that. So you'll have an infestation that's kind of increasing over time and getting worse over many years, because it's not really hurting the vascular system or directly killing the tree. It's taking its resources, so stressing it that way, and it's preventing it from being able to put on new growth because it's killing these shoots. All of this also means that if the trees are stressed for any other reason, they're going to be much more impacted by the hemlock woolly adelgid than if they were doing really well. So here are some more photos of kind of what you can see. These kind of cottony white ovisacs are the most eye-catching part of the hemlock woolly adelgid. And that's kind of what you're going to notice, not the insects themselves that are hiding in here. Here's an adult and here's the eggs. Those are quite tiny. So you probably will miss those unless you're looking really carefully, maybe have your magnifying glass out and are looking for them. They have a really complex life cycle. So in general, there are 2 generations on hemlock each year. And the females will lay eggs in these cottony ovisacs, kind of hiding them in there. That's probably what you're going to see. And if you look inside, there's some eggs. They might hatch, form crawlers that you also may notice, and then kind of repeat that cycle 2 generations a year. That's significant when we start talking about management, because some of the management approaches really depend on that life cycle, and you need to catch it just at the right time. Something to note with the hemlock woolly adelgid. And it is estimated that a single female can lay anywhere between 50 and 300 eggs. So the potential to really expand their populations rapidly. So here's a map of where the hemlock woolly adelgid is right now. And you can see that pretty much everything that's in color is the range of hemlock. So the green is where the hemlock woolly adelgid has not yet arrived, and the red and the yellow is where it has. So what you can see is there are some pockets where hemlock woolly adelgid has not arrived in the southern Appalachians, and certainly further north. I think once those places are a little colder than we are. You know, here in Kentucky, a lot of the area that has hemlock has the adelgid or will likely get it soon. You know, we're right in the middle of it there. So something to consider. And when it comes to treatment options for this, there are several different ones out there. So the first one would be contact insecticides. These are things like horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps. And you can kind of see a picture here of someone with a Great Smoky Mountains National Park Service spraying some trees. This is a possibility, but it does have some drawbacks. So the thing that you're spraying has to come directly in contact with the insect, and not just kind of any stage of the insect. It's got to come in contact with the insect when it's at one of those stages that it's going to be susceptible to it. So you've got to look at that timing chart and think about, okay, when should I spray this? And you've also got to spray this whole tree. So you've really got to drench it if you want that to work. So the timing is key. You've got to time it maybe during that March to April window or September to October to catch one of those two generations. And it's really only going to work for those smaller trees or if you've got it accessible. A lot kind of more involved with this, clearly not something you're going to be able to do way off in your woods somewhere. So that is one option, but I think it's really mostly an option for those landscape trees or those smaller specimen trees. There are several different systemic insecticides available. By systemic, you know, they're going to move through the vascular system of the tree and kill those insects kind of generally that are feeding on that tree. There's dinotefuran and then imidacloprid insecticides. Now, the big difference between these two is that these are going to move into the canopy more quickly, but they're going to be effective for a shorter period of time. So they might be really useful in terms of if you have a really heavy infestation, maybe in a landscape setting that you really want to address, but they're not going to be as useful probably in your woodland setting because they're not going to last as long. And if these are trees you're not visiting all the time, you probably don't want to have to be doing it every year or two. The imidacloprid insecticides for hemlock woolly adelgid will move into the canopy more slowly, but they're going to be effective over a longer period of time, 5 to 7 years. They also kind of are longer term and they're cheaper in general because they last for longer. So you don't have to repeat them as often. So this may be less effective for those really heavy infestations, but a really good option in the forest setting. And I'm going to reference several different publications by Elizabeth McCarty and University of Georgia on optimized insecticide dosages for hemlock woolly adelgid control in hemlock trees. They have some fantastic publications, and I'll also put those in the chat when I'm done for you all to have to reference back to. So with the insecticides, the systemic insecticides I mentioned, there are several different options within that. So let's say you want to use an imidacloprid insecticide to control hemlock woolly adelgid. There are several different options. The most common one that I see used in the forest setting is the soil drench. So you're going to first measure the diameter of your tree, because the amount of insecticide that you put on it needs to correspond to the size of the tree, with obviously more insecticide for the larger trees than for the smaller trees. So in general, that's the first step. Then you might rake away the top layer of leaf litter from around the tree, the duff, to kind of come directly in contact with the soil where the roots are. And you do that all around the tree because you want to be applying the insecticide, not just kind of in one spot, but all around the tree and kind of that foot around the base of the tree. And then you'd mix up your insecticide. There are several different formulations of insecticide that you can get, but you would mix it up and then pour it around that tree. So that's the soil drench method. And then I put this photo in here because a lot of people also, and I think it's a good idea, to mark your trees when you're done, so you know which ones you treated and which ones you didn't, because it can be surprisingly easy to forget that. Afterwards, especially, right then you might know, but a year later, it's harder to remember which ones have been done. And that's true for whatever technique you're using. There are some different, there's many different insecticides on the market for that kind of thing, even within a soil drench with imidacloprid. There might be a water-soluble packet or a flowable formulation. And you're going to want to follow the instructions for both of those that are listed on the label. There are also soil and trunk injections. This is a soil injection right here, but there are trunk injections as well with imidacloprid. And here you can kind of see this trunk injection. Now, I don't think that this, first off, it's going to require additional equipment that most people might not own. This is more for those tree professionals. In addition, the trunk injection does damage the tree to some extent because you're drilling something into the tree. So something you want to think about and be careful of. One thing that I did want to mention that's kind of a newer product with imidacloprid are what are called Cortect pellets. And they're these little pellets with imidacloprid that you will kind of do the same thing you do with a soil drench. You would rake off the duff layer and bury those around the tree with the number of pellets that you bury dependent on the size of the tree and the diameter of that tree, with more pellets for those larger trees. But that's really convenient because you don't have to be mixing it with water, which if this is something that's, way far out, a distant hike and not very accessible, might be a great option to look into. And I'll provide some more information on that as well as some links to these pellets. But a newer product that you might not have been aware of. So a good thing to consider. So other management tools that are in this toolbox. So these insecticides are really what you want to think about right now to protect your trees. But long term, I think there's some great other kind of research and options that are being developed. And one of those is biological control with predatory insects. So that's something, there are several different predatory insects that are being used, both insects from Asia, the native range of our hemlock woolly adelgid, as well as predatory insects of the type of adelgid that they have on the West Coast, looking at those as a potential way to control hemlock woolly adelgid populations long term, so that long term we won't have to be using as much, we'll have to be as reliant on those insecticides. So I'm going to show just a short video of Alexandra Blevins, who's the forest health specialist with the Kentucky Division of Forestry, releasing some of these predatory beetles in the Daniel Boone National Forest as a part of their project to see whether or not that might be they able to establish populations there. So let's see, can you all see this okay?
Yes.
Hello again, everyone. This is Alexandra Blevins with the Kentucky Division of Forestry, and we are out here today at Dog Slaughter Falls to talk about our hemlock treatment program. So you might have heard that the hemlock woolly adelgid has been here in Kentucky, most likely from around 2006. And the Kentucky Division of Forestry has actually been treating for this invasive insect that is harming our beautiful hemlock trees since 2009. At first, we were just treating at some of our state forests, and then we started to branch out into our state parks and national forest land. So we are here in a part of the Daniel Boone National Forest, and we are checking out these hemlock trees. And so, you might have hemlocks on your property, and you might be thinking to yourself, I really like these trees and I want to do my part to try and save them. So today we're using a biological control method with a predatory beetle that specializes on feeding on the hemlock woolly adelgid, but there is another option as well. You can also use a chemical treatment, applying an insecticide, imidacloprid is what it's called, that you can find at your local hardware store, and you can treat your trees chemically by yourself. If you would like to find out more information about both of these treatment options, you can reach out to your local extension office, or you can contact the Kentucky Division of Forestry or the UK Forest Health Extension. And I'm out here today at the beautiful Dog Slaughter Falls trailhead just outside of Cumberland Falls State Park. And what I have with me here in this jug are Laricobius nigrinus beetles. And these are predatory beetles that feed specifically on the hemlock woolly adelgid. The hemlock woolly adelgid is an invasive bug that is attacking our beautiful hemlock trees that you can see here in the background. Right now, they are starting to become active, and so that's why we're out here today releasing these predatory beetles, because these beetles are a biological control agent that is helping to, keep at bay the levels of hemlock woolly adelgid that we have here in our state. So there are another way that we can help to treat these trees besides a insecticide treatment. So we are releasing these guys onto these trees here along the roadside. We're looking for trees that get ample sunlight. They've never been chemically treated before. And the reason that is a very important reason for that, if these trees were to be treated with insecticide and these little guys were to eat the adelgid that have been treated, then they would also die as well. So that's a very important piece to the puzzle. So these trees have never been treated before, but as you can see, they still look fairly healthy. And that's because they've got ample sunlight with this break in the road here. And, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So they will have you want to have a high adelgid, hemlock woolly adelgid population because that's what they feed on. So we have been checking these trees, in the past couple weeks to make sure that there is a healthy enough population to support these beetles. And so we have 500 of these guys with us today, and we're going to select 5 trees and distribute them as evenly as we can, and then we'll come back and, keep your fingers crossed that we will find larvae after these guys mate and are happy. And then next year, we will hopefully come back and find more adults. And so our objective with this release program is to hopefully build a field insectary for future use. So we can, come back here and are able to easily just get these beetles off these trees and distribute them to other areas. The beetles are very tiny. They're kind of hard to see probably right now, but believe me, they're in here. And what we're doing is just lightly draping these hemlock branches on this tree.
All right, so that was just a little taste of the research that's kind of ongoing to give us some other tools for keeping hemlock long-term. So obviously for individual trees right now, that insecticide is really key, but long-term, we really want to have natural predators in the environment. We want these predatory beetles that maybe aren't going to completely eradicate them, but can at least knock their populations back enough that our hemlock can still survive. There are other kind of research approaches to go along with this, because as Alexandra mentioned in that video, one of the interesting things about it is that light and light access and how fast the trees are growing is another big part of this puzzle. And so she mentioned, you know, these trees are still doing well because they have a lot of light access and they're right here on this trail opening. So they might have the Hemlock Adelgid, but they're still able to continue growing. And so there are some silvicultural techniques like kind of opening up light access to some trees and encouraging them to grow more that can be beneficial as well. And in particular, once we start to have these predatory beetles around, thinking about some kind of integration of chemical and biological control approaches. So I think that that's something to think about for the future. And right now, those biological controls aren't really something you can order as an individual landowner and introduce to your woods, although hopefully they will be more available in the future, as well as just kind of persistent in the environment. So thinking about how do you integrate that with chemical treatment of some trees as well, because these same insecticides that are killing your Hemlock Adelgid will also kill other insects. And kind of going along with that, you know, there's areas where you can't be using those insecticides. You don't want to be using those insecticides within 10 feet of a stream or other really sensitive areas, because you don't want to be impacting other things with those insecticides. So starting to think about, you know, what else goes into management of Hemlock Adelgid long term. Another exciting project that's ongoing is research by the U.S. Forest Service and Hemlock Restoration Initiative, Forest Restoration Alliance, to try to find hemlock trees that are resistant to the emerald ash borer, that either, you know, aren't attractive hosts or can defend themselves against, or not emerald ash borer, Hemlock Adelgid, that can, you know, defend themselves from that and aren't as impacted. So imagine you're in an area where all of the hemlock has been killed by Hemlock Adelgid, except for, you know, this one. Is there something genetically better about that tree that's going to, you know, be inherited? So maybe you could use that as a start of a breeding program. And they're looking for those trees. So if you happen to see any, you can use the Tree Snap app to report them, to try to see, are there these lingering hemlock trees that are still healthy when everything else, all the other hemlock around them, have died. They might have some special gene that you know, makes them really good at dealing with the Hemlock Adelgid. And that could be part of the future picture as well. So in addition to more predators, you've got kind of a different genetic pool of hemlock that could be moving in. And, you know, in our area, what we're thinking about is eastern hemlock. That's most of hemlock's range, but this is also a problem for Carolina hemlock as well. So a couple other things I want to mention before kind of opening it up to some questions are that there are other issues out there for hemlock right now too. And in particular, there's another invasive insect that can look, you know, somewhat similar to the adelgids, and that is elongate hemlock scale. So you see here these tiny kind of little white scaly things. That's the elongate hemlock scale, doing some similar things. So sucking the sap and the nutrients from those needles, stressing those trees out over time. And I've seen a lot of hemlock, elongate hemlock scale in both the forest settings and also in landscape settings. So I'm here in Lexington, Kentucky, and my neighbors have hemlock trees, and their hemlock trees have elongate hemlock scale. And what you can see is a kind of slow decline over time, not as fast as Hemlock Adelgid, but little by little, that tree becoming thinner and thinner, yellowing of those needles, kind of more and more stressed over time. So something to also be on the lookout for. And with the elongate hemlock scale, as with Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, there are insecticide options for control. In addition, hemlock, if it's planted in a landscape setting, will frequently struggle with various site issues. So yellow hemlocks because perhaps the pH isn't right, or there is compacted soil or other things that those hemlock trees don't like. Recently, I've had a few reports of a new, to me, disease on hemlock that's Roselinea needle blight, and it's a fungal disease. Now, I think this is not really a major issue. This is something that'll pop up from time to time, and because it's hemlock, my first thought is, oh, this must be Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, but it's not necessarily. There are other things that'll impact hemlocks, and this one I think is associated with really, really wet weather. So here you can see a photo of some needles that are covered with this fuzzy fungal growth. And here you've got these black parathecia, the spore structures of that fungus fruiting from the hemlock twigs there. So something else that can cause occasional dieback in hemlocks, pretty rare, but something nonetheless that I've seen a few times in the past few years. I think as we enter into a period that's wetter, things are projected to be wetter in the future, this may be more of a problem going forward. So hopefully that provided you an introduction to Hemlock Woolly Adelgid and some of the treatment techniques for it, as well as long-term options for control. But I'm happy to take your questions now. And if you have any that you'd rather send me over email, this is my email. And I also encourage you to follow me online on social media. You can find me and my lab at KY Forest Health on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube as well. So we are always trying to put new information out there about new insects and diseases and invasive plants as they arise. So definitely check that out. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and see what questions you all have, or maybe Jeremy and Phil, you all would like to share some about kind of what you've seen and what's going on with Hemlock Woolly Adelgid in your areas, as well as like what's worked for people.
Great information, Ellen. And if you do have a question, feel free to unmute. Feel free to tap it in the chat pod, and we can take care of it there. But when we first found it in, it was when it was first found in Kentucky. It was one of those things of, it was almost a death sentence to the hemlock tree. And the next step was, what are we going to do to put back in the forest, where what trees are going to come back? The first thing you're thinking of is poplar. What is it going to do to the streams? What is it going to do to the stream temperature? What is it going to do to the species that are in the streams, the species that are in these deep hollers that have these the hemlock there? But we saw those two. You mentioned the polar vortex. We saw those two back-to-back winters that were really cold, and that helped knock it back. One of the things that we saw, I had people calling me at the office, what can I do? I've heard about this. What can I do? I only have 3 or 4 trees in my yard. Immediately I told them about the imidacloprid and that was an option. It wasn't a cheap option, but it was something that they were looking at that possibly would take care of trees for 3 years. Now we're finding out it's 5 to 7 years, and so that's a good thing. But one of the things that I'm starting to see here in Harlan County, and Phil in Wise County, he may have something different, but one of the things that I'm starting to see is it seems an uptick in the numbers of HWA showing back up on the same trees that they were once knocked down at some point in time, but now they're showing up a little bit more. And Ellen's putting a lot of great information there in the chat pod, so definitely click on that and bring that up in your web browser. But pretty much that's what I've seen or heard here in Harlan County. Phil, you have any comments or any questions?
I know that most of the time when people call about control options, it's pretty far advanced at that point. And I know I've recommended the products to folks before. I don't know how many actually follow through because like you've mentioned, they're expensive and a bit hard to find in some cases. So I don't know if there's, other than public lands, in public lands, there's been some treatment, but as far as yard trees and so forth, I'm not aware of many that have actually been treated.
And I'd say especially if these are trees in your yard, you might as well treat them, because unlike emerald ash borer, you've got to treat it every 3 years or so, and you can get a lot more time with these treatments. And it's not necessarily because hemlock woolly adelgids is so patchy across the landscape. You're not like, you could have even longer than that, depending on when those woolly adelgids find your hemlocks again. So, and I would say that I mentioned this earlier, but these are not selective to the hemlock woolly adelgids. They'll impact other things. So especially if you think about the role of hemlocks in a lot of these areas where they're kind of near streams, and there can be all sorts of insects that are in those streams that are also very important. You want to be careful to follow some of those guidelines in terms of not treating too close to those streams and just being aware of that. But really, your alternative is losing those trees, which would also fundamentally change everything about those streams, would raise the temperature there, which would impact what would grow there as well. Even if you do get your other species taking its place, like Jeremy was mentioning, like maybe yellow poplar coming in when those die, there's going to be a window of time there where you don't have that, and things are going to look really different. Yeah, this is one of those tricky situations where right now, other than the insecticide treatment, there's not a good option for protecting trees large scale. Now, on those public lands, Kentucky Division of Forestry, those folks that you saw in that video, they've really been doing a great job, as well as other, federal and state partners in different areas, trying to treat as many trees as they can, just to keep those trees from dying. But long term, hopefully some combination of insecticide, predatory beetles, and breeding for resistance will improve the situation.
Well, definitely. And we're 15 years into this thing, and it's much better than what was originally thought, from the research, and a lot of the research was coming from out of the Shenandoah. And
they were really affected. Yeah.
That it was, a lot of trees up there just decimated. So definitely in our region, whether it be in Southwest Virginia, Southeast Kentucky, we've been a whole lot better off than the Shenandoahs.
Because hopefully it stays that way. I hope it stays that way.
Definitely. Because there's a lot of trees that were affected by the HWA 15 years ago that they're still standing, and they still have some new growth to them every year, and so on and so forth. So definitely that's a good thing, and we'll hang on to that as long as we can.
Yeah, we don't, the scenario, if you go to any of those places where they've really wiped out all the trees, it's just terrible. I mean, it's very sad. And there's you can't go backwards in time on that. You can't undo the loss of those trees. So, I hope that we're able to protect our trees through, a variety of options.
Definitely. And like you mentioned with the chemical options, if you go in that direction, whatever that label says, go with that label. That label's a law, so to speak, and so go with that and follow that to where it's to a T.
Yep.
Any questions? Any comments? I'm sure if you've been out in the woods long enough, you've seen the HWA and may or may not seen the effects of it. So that's a good thing, because I on property that my family owns, We've had HWA for, well more than 10 years, and the trees are still standing. The trees are still green, and they have the HWA on them right now. So hopefully it won't be as bad as we think. And one of the things too with the chemical treatment is I often tell people we can save trees. We may not be able to save forest. So if you've got some of those trees in the backyard that are, a stick and have some sort of a semblance to you, you're able to save those things. And if you only have to treat once every 5 to 7 years, that's great. Any questions, comments? If not, Ellen, thank you so much. Thank you so much. We appreciate you logging in and sharing this great information with us tonight. And it's been wonderful. If you've not clicked on the information there in the chat pod that Ellen uploaded there, click on that. That way it comes up in your web browser and you can save that. But some really good information there. Definitely.
Yes, thank you very much. Very good.
Yeah, and Jeremy and Phil, I know you both have a lot of experience with this as well, and so are just fantastic resources with Hemlock Adelgid and so many other things. So thanks for inviting me to join. It was nice to meet all of you. It was nice to see some furry friends in the background. Joan and Mary, I see you have some kittens back there, I'm guessing. And I always love seeing that. That's one of the fun parts of Zoom, is that we get these little windows. Oh, it wasn't a kitten, it was a puppy. I love it. Yay. Oh, look at our friends. I love this. Oh, sometimes I'm lucky and my dog will join me for these things, but mostly she stays away from the Zoom. Well, it was really nice meeting you all. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And if I don't have the answer for you, I'll try to put you in touch with someone who does. There is some great expertise and some researchers who are really focused on Hemlock Adelgid that are doing some interesting things and providing us with new tools for the toolbox. So if you've got questions that I can't answer, I'm happy to put you in touch with some others that might.
Ellen, sounds great. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us this evening. Phil, do you have anything to add on next week? I know coming up Tuesday, I think we have sweet sorghum, and Thursday we have something about melons, I think, correct?
Yes, Thursday we've got Dr. Natalie Bumgardner from the University of Tennessee. She's going to be talking about growing melons in your garden as well as other vining crops. I know that's something that a lot of our clients struggle with, is try to get a decent watermelon or a decent cantaloupe that has flavor and doesn't rot. So she's going to be unlocking the secrets of that.
Sounds good. And I know I can't remember who the speaker is on the sweet sorghum, but definitely
Chad Lee, I bet.
Chad Lee, that's who it is. Chad Lee, yeah, exactly, that's who it is. So we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Everybody have a great weekend. From what I understand, it's warming up. It's going to warm up this weekend. So, and a little cold spell today, a little snow over here in Harlan County. So, but good to see everybody this evening. And everybody have a great weekend. Phil, do you have anything else to add?
I don't.
All right.
Appreciate the presentation.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Ellen. And everybody have a great evening, and we'll see you all next week.